Dolphins fans, 25 years, the longest standing playoff win drought in the NFL. So maybe this year, if like 13 things go right with a little bit of luck and good weather, this might end this year. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 24 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season. As today we take a deep dive into the Miami Dolphins. This one's gonna get a little weird, man, because the Dolphins are in a really weird spot. Coming off another Tua Tagovailoa injury-riddled season. You've got star players no longer with the team. You have star players saying they no longer want to be a part of this team. Is this a transition season? Are they still going for it? This team is really caught in the middle right now, and we've got a lot to talk about here today. Before we do get started, though, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help me out. It tells YouTube you enjoyed the video and to push it out to other Dolphins fans and NFL diehards just like you. And of course, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of our remaining deep dives. But let's go ahead and get started. As always, taking a look at the team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse, where they may have stayed the same. And let's start with the coaching staff with the Miami Dolphins. It is the same group for the most part. They are changing special teams coordinators. Not enough for me to say upgraded or downgraded there, though. Just going to say neutral / to be determined as they go from Danny Crossman last year to Craig Aukerman this year. But then at quarterback, backup from last year, Tyler Huntley, who, of course, had to play about a quarter of the season last year, didn't play particularly well for the Dolphins. But they do take a little swing at Zach Wilson, which it's not enough for me to say upgraded in the quarterback room because of what we've seen from Zach Wilson so far. But I do think it's a solid addition and little dart throw to make, given the history we've seen with the kind of Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield crop in recent years. So definitely a noteworthy addition. And then another dart throw on Quinn Ewers in the 7th round of the draft. So, bringing in some what-if candidates, if you will. Not going to say upgraded in the quarterback room. There are going to be some Dolphins fans following the series closely that say, hey, what the heck? You've been listing other players returning from injury to the additions list. And if Tua didn't miss 6 games on average, as he did last year, I probably would list him here. But I don't know how you can head in with any certainty that they're going to get more games out of Tua this year than they did last year. So that's why you don't see his name there. But then at running back, I actually say slightly upgraded here. I don't hate what they did. They do lose Raheem Mostert, obviously getting up there in age and looked like it last year, I think. Played 24% of their snaps last year, but he has been really good for them and in the last couple of years. But they do add something that they haven't really had, and that is some legit size in this running back room. Alexander Mattison and Ollie Gordon in the 6th round out of Oklahoma State. I think it does bring a little bit of physicality and toughness to this RB room, which can be viewed as a form of upgrade to this running back room. At tight end, very minimal change. Durham Smythe no longer with the team, and they bring in veteran Pharaoh Brown, so saying neutral at tight end. Wide receiver, slightly upgraded. They lose Odell Beckham, if you can even call that a loss for what he, quote-unquote, did for this team last year. Someone tell me what that was, maybe. And then River Craycraft, actually probably a bigger loss than Odell Beckham. Not that he's a hard player to replace. But then they bring in Nick Westbrook-Akine. Quietly a nice addition for this team. I'm excited to talk about what he can do for this offense in the wide receiver breakdown later on. But again, slightly upgraded with wide receiver and then slightly downgraded on the offensive line. Definitely a big loss with Teron Armstead retiring, no way around it. I did get a good kick out of seeing that he played 72% of his snaps in his final season, the number he wears, and I would wager damn near close to the average percentage of snaps that he played every season. He was infamously known for missing about a quarter of the season. So a fitting way to go out, but a hell of a career for Teron Armstead. They do also lose some guys that got some good playing time for them last year. Kendall Lamb goes to Philadelphia. Robert Jones, who played 95% of their snaps at guard, goes to Dallas. But they did, thank God, Dolphins fans, actually make some moves on the offensive line this offseason. They bring in James Daniels to plug in at guard there where Robert Jones was. And then in the 2nd round of the draft, they bring in Jonas Savaiinaea, Very fun prospect. He's got a lot to prove, but a lot of potential there. So not quite enough to completely offset the Teron Armstead loss, really. That's why it's still slightly downgraded, but it could be worse, certainly, had they not made some additions there. And then also shout out Larry Borum as a swing tackle for them. They bring in as depth, too. But then taking a look at the changes on defense, a lot of roster turnover here. So on the interior of the defensive line, Calais Campbell, who was a starter for them last year, he heads back to Arizona. And Deshaun Hand, who had a nice little mini reemergent for this team, playing half of their snaps along that D-line last year. So some losses for sure, but they do counteract them. They draft Kenneth Grant, the nose tackle out of Michigan, in the first round. In the fifth round, they grab Jordan Phillips, who can defend the run a little bit, and then Zeke Biggers, a total, traits-based toolsy prospect in the seventh round. Definitely to be determined with all of the additions being rookies, but is it reasonable to think that Kenneth Grant can give you something close to what Campbell did? Jordan Phillips can give you something close to what Deshaun Hand did? Yeah, I think it's reasonable to hope for that at least, but I did leave it as neutral for the interior of the defensive line. But then on the edge, this is 100% to be determined, with both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb fighting back from ACL injuries. And the tough reality about this is you, me, the Dolphins, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, nobody has any idea how this is going to go for these guys. Both have had just, frankly, tragic injury records over the last couple of years. Dolphins fans thought I was too low on what these two guys were going to give them last year, and they got effectively nothing from them last year. So it is completely to be determined there. For what it's worth, their only losses were Emmanuel Ogbah, who did do some decent stuff on 70% of their snaps last year, and Tyus Bowser, that one not so noteworthy. Obviously, on paper, this looks quite upgraded, but it is up to Phillips and Chubb to get healthy and stay healthy before we can say that. At linebacker, a lot of moving pieces here. So Anthony Walker is out the door. He started half of their games last year. David Long, they released midseason last year. And then you have to account for the midseason addition of Tyrell Dotson being an addition to this year's version of the Dolphins. He only played 26% of their snaps last year. They would anticipate that's going to be much higher this year. And then Willie Gay is a nice veteran addition, along with KJ Britt, going from the West Coast of Florida to the East Coast over from Tampa. So a lot of new names in there. I did say slightly upgraded with that linebacker room that was really kind of a turnstile last season. Should be much more stable this year. And then at cornerback, this is obviously a big talking point. Is Jalen Ramsey going to be on this football team? And I'm operating under the assumption that no, he's not, the way that he's talked about it. And everything you kind of hear about it is that there is a very loud market for Jalen Ramsey. The Dolphins are waiting on the right trade here. But it really feels like the Jalen Ramsey Dolphins era is coming to a close. Now, later in the video, when we break down the defensive backs and stuff, I will show all the rankings if Jalen Ramsey stays on this team. And in fact, they would end up higher in these power rankings if he stays. But I'm so confident at this point in time that he is going to be playing elsewhere that I think it is probably good process for us to proceed operating with him off of this Dolphins team, and that they're going to get probably a third or a fourth round pick for him. And then Kendall Fuller as well didn't play great for this team, but he did start half their snaps last year, and they didn't really add anybody in this secondary. That's kind of the crazy thing, and that might make you think a little bit of why Jalen Ramsey could be sticking around here. They brought in Artie Burns and a fifth-round dart throw on Jason Marshall out of Florida. That's it. So definitely downgraded if they trade Jalen Ramsey. If not, kind of a push, frankly. But definitely downgraded at safety. They let Javon Holland walk in free agency, really a star safety. You can make an argument this was the second offseason in a row that the Dolphins let the best overall player hit the market, from Christian Wilkins to Javon Holland. Their cap management has really been poor here from this front office. But Jordan Poyer actually played 91% of their snaps last year. Pretty impressive at his age. and he was very average. But then Marcus May as well. So 3 veterans leaving that safety group, and then really just kind of dart throws getting brought in here. Ifeatu Melifonwu, who was never a full-time starter for Detroit, but showed some flashes. Ashton Davis, kind of likewise with the Jets. And then Dante Trader Jr., kind of a run defense-oriented safety in the 5th round. Pretty easy to say downgraded with that group. And then with the special teams, it is kind of fascinating. They bring in Ryan Stonehouse from Tennessee, and Our Lads actually lists Stonehouse as the starter. I kind of think it's going to be Jake Bailey, because Jake Bailey was still really good last year, but maybe they're looking to save some money there. I would love Dolphins fans' opinions on who's going to be the starter for them. Technically, if they go with Stonehouse over Bailey, that would be a downgrade at punter, going off the grading for the last couple of years. But fascinating, to say the least. Usually when you have a good punter on a cheap contract like Jake Bailey, teams just kind of leave it. But that does conclude this Dolphins offseason. Again, just kind of all over the place. Just a lot of veteran names on the way out. You have the Jalen Ramsey trade still hanging over here. There was even a moment where Tyreek Hill wanted out of here. It feels like he's going to be back at this point. And then you got the returning edge rushers for injury, which makes this season even extra strange for this Dolphins team. But on top of all of that, I do want to give this Dolphins front office some credit. I don't typically give this Dolphins front office a ton of credit. I think they're towards the bottom as far as worst GMs in the, Chris Greer being one of the worst GMs in the league. But I do think they had some good self-reflection, and most of their additions are towards physicality and play strength, frankly. Where they did spend money in free agency was on the offensive line. Their first 2 picks were a defensive tackle and an offensive lineman. I even like the Nick Westbrook-Akine addition as a little bit more of a toughness and play strength addition to a wide receiver room that really, since Mike McDaniel has been here, it's been all about speed, no matter what. And it's like, well, you could actually balance a little bit of that speed with, smart, tough football players on top of it. So there was some aspects of this offseason that I did like for this Dolphins team. And generally speaking, that would allude to them maybe heading towards the quote unquote right direction of the idea that you have to be able to get to January and play physical, a physical brand of football. It can't be all about team speed in cold weather January playoff football. So there are aspects of this offseason that did make a lot of sense and are worth praising. But with that, let's get into the coach and scheme segment for the Dolphins. Familiar faces here. The Dolphins are running it back with Mike McDaniel in year 4 as the head coach, with Frank Smith underneath him as the de facto offensive coordinator, though make no mistake about it, this is Mike McDaniel's offense. And then this is year 2 for Anthony Weaver as the defensive coordinator after coming over from Baltimore and the Mike Macdonald system. But there are maybe some new narratives developing with this coaching staff, especially with Mike McDaniel. This is really the first offseason where I think there's some pump the brakes on Mike McDaniel as a head coach. I mean, really, since he's come out the gate here in Miami in 2022, it has been an overwhelming wave of praise for McDaniel and his schematic genius, his creativity, his willingness to try things and introduce new concepts, not just play concepts, but just little ideas. Like, for example, that cheat motion, which is what the league calls it. That quick motion before the snap where you take your speed player, in the Dolphins' case, Tyreek Hill, sprinting before the snap like a Canadian football team would, where you get them a free release in motion and running at full speed into the middle of the defense, really at the snap. That was really something Mike McDaniel weaponized in the NFL that the league certainly took note of and started copying very, very quickly. So it was all these sort of creative wrinkles and concepts that Mike McDaniel was bringing to the table. And it really had led to them saving Tua in this offense and reaching impressive heights, putting up big numbers in this offense and getting this Dolphins team back into the playoff picture. He has been one of the most praised head coaches in the league since 2022. But last season, that luster really wore off. And it wasn't just that this team was losing games and missed the playoffs, and you're starting to get some of this locker room crap, whether it's, Tyreek Hill saying he's gone after the year, Jalen Ramsey wanting a trade, all the Vic Fangio stuff a couple years ago. Like, there's been just some bad vibes from a sort of culture perspective, I would say, over the last sort of 400 days or so. So that's kind of piled onto all this. But really more specifically speaking about like the scheme and the play calling, it just doesn't feel like Mike McDaniel is in his bag right now. The last couple of seasons, 2022, 2023, it really felt like he came out with something that defenses were not prepared for. 2022, all the quick hitting, deep digs with the speed that he was introducing with this team, going to get Tyreek Hill, getting like 15, 20-yard chunk plays off of RPOs. And then 2023 with that little cheat motion. 2024, like, what was the thing? There wasn't really a new creative wrinkle. It really felt like they were picking back up off of where they were in 2023, which if you're not going to bring that offense elevating creative wrinkle to the table that was kind of the core of what made Mike McDaniel so great as this head coach, if you're not bringing that to the table, you kind of start to get exposed a little bit more for what some of his criticisms were in 2022 and 2023, in that, okay, you're able to come out the gate and really catch these defenses by storm. And for the first 6-7 weeks of his first few years in Miami, it was like, just overwhelming defenses. But as the film gets out and defenses try some different things to counteract what you're bringing out to start the season, where was the counterpunch? And we saw Mike McDaniel's offenses kind of cool off down the stretch and most notably struggle in playoff games. So if 2024 is an extension of that, where it does just kind of feel like defenses are onto him a little bit more, not like they're shutting him down and he can never get guys open, but a lot of those core philosophies in terms of those quick hitting intermediate throws and where they want to go off of RPOs and play action, safeties really collapsing under that, linebackers learning to get a little bit more depth and not take the cheese on play action. Like, the ability to continue to innovate felt for the first time last year like it was really missing. And that's concerning, obviously. So because of that, and then sprinkling on top a little bit more losing and some of this locker room stuff, I do have Mike McDaniel kind of falling in the rankings a little bit here. For example, I had him 5th last year. This year I've got him 15th as a head coach, which I still like him. I still want to believe in him and that he can kind of refocus after a really weird, bad season last year. And I would love to see him come back out swinging with some new creative wrinkle and maybe even flirt with it, but keep whatever that is. And I can't tell you what that trick, that creative wrinkle is going to be, because if I could, I would be out there designing NFL offenses. Mike McDaniel is special at this for a reason, but whatever it might be, my suggestion is keep it in your back pocket a little bit. Maybe sprinkle it in there, in a third quarter in week 4 just to make sure it works. But maybe wait till week 15, week 16 to make that a staple of your offense so that you don't get to the end of the year and teams figure out how to stop whatever that thing is. But it could also be that he is out of tricks in his bag and you're talking about a coach that's, I don't want to say in over his head, but in a tough spot right now, certainly with where this organization is at. And I think that all just kind of combines and leads up to the idea that this is just a very big year for Mike McDaniel to get back to what we felt about him a year ago. Now, as far as the actual offensive coaching rankings that I use for this series, they are still really quite high for the Dolphins, which I think is a vote of confidence from me in Mike McDaniel's capabilities to kind of get back on track here. You will see the pass game coaching is slipping a little bit, though. Last year, we would have had an A grade for Mike McDaniel, tied for first for pass game design with the Dolphins. Now with an A- grade down to 5th to 8th. So that's where you're really seeing maybe some questions start to show up. But the run game design is still excellent here, and that was actually McDaniel's background in San Francisco. He was more of the run game coordinator, and I do still think there are a lot of creative things that they do to get the run game going. They've done it with really just a bunch of athletes on that offensive line for the most part. And I do think he's a big elevator to this run game. So still an A grade there. And when it related to the Dolphins run game, I didn't see too much to have concern about the creativity in that phase. It was more about the passing game stuff that felt more missing to me as I watched the Dolphins last year. But there's sort of the half of the Mike McDaniel conversation, which is all about his narrative and his standing in the league. I do want to have the other half of the conversation with Mike McDaniel, which is still a very fun convo, and that is what his scheme is and what this team looks like, X's and O's wise, because the Dolphins really are the most unique offense in the entire league, and I think that makes them really fun to just discuss what they're doing here. And McDaniel's offense is, of course, at its heart of hearts, a Kyle Shanahan inspired offense. He was under Kyle for 10 years in Washington, Cleveland, Atlanta, San Francisco, where he was ultimately the run game coordinator. But he has come to Miami and just kind of re-envisioned the whole thing. Just using different formations and sort of pre-snap concepts to get at the same ideas, which, of course, in a Shanahan offense, the idea is you want to marry the run and the pass, use run concepts that look like your play action concepts, and use that play action to suck in linebackers, get the defensive line moving east and west instead of north and south, which helps your pass protection. And then off of play action, you suck in those linebackers, and usually it's a crossing route or a dig route that you're dropping in over their head, right? Like, there's 20 different deep dives that we're discussing the Kyle Shanahan concept that the league is running. It works and works for good reason. And that's all absolutely at the heart of what Mike McDaniel wants to do, but he's added in so many different twists in terms of the formations he runs, the pre-snap motion he uses, and just the style of plays that he's calling, that this really doesn't look like a Kyle Shanahan offense or any of the other, 17 other Shanahan schemes in the league right now. And it can be tough to really pinpoint what it is and why this looks so different, but a couple of those reasons, just for the course of this conversation, I think the way that this offense is so predicated on running toss plays with pulling linemen, really like sweep-inspired runs, getting these guys out in space, getting all these athletes on the offensive line, and then mixing in different pre-snap motions with that. And in many cases, it's these reverse fakes or the threat to actually run the reverse, where you're running the toss to the running back, and then he loves to like line up a Devon Achane in the slot, and he's getting the reverse. And just the threat of speed and athleticism and constantly keeping you on your heels with all of this different misdirection and the threat of that speed and the big play threat, it really puts a lot of fear into these defenses. And then I would say the other aspect of what can make this offense look so much more different and difficult to defend in so many situations is I think McDaniel has really taken the threat of that RPO from San Francisco, where they run, backside glances and bubble screen RPOs like the daylights in San Francisco, but really taking that to the next level, literally leveled concepts, running dig routes and hitting you up the seam off of these RPOs, where you're not just catching a slant or a bubble screen off the RPO, but you're in space 15 yards down the field with explosive plays off of RPOs. And you can really only do that when you have a Tyreek Hill and a Jalen Waddle who can explode into the second level as much as anybody, or if you bring in the creative wrinkle of that cheat motion where you're really getting them so they can sprint into that space. And that's when you see Tua, okay, he's faking the toss, turning around, and that ball is out like that. Literally, they have had the fastest time to throw in the NFL in Mike McDaniel's time here. And a big part of that is Tua, but a big part of that too is what they're trying to do with this offense. And those are probably the two main differences with this offense. There's a long list of other things. Like, their run game also it's not just the tosses. Like, their run game just is very unique. They almost always have some form of pullers or tight ends coming cross formation. They do just come out, like, you will see them occasionally just come out in wide zone, like run wide zone at you, but not like all the other teams. Like, that's kind of their fourth or fifth pitch, if you will, to just come out and run wide zone. And oftentimes when they do run wide zone, it's actually wide zone toss. They do really lean into that aspect, but the run game is just very, very unique. Like we said, Mike McDaniel was the run game coordinator in San Francisco. He's very comfortable getting into his bag in that side of things. And then you can also talk about, like, this is one of the few offenses left in the league that runs a lot of 21 personnel, which is 2 backs and 1 tight end and 2 wide receivers. They use Alec Ingold as much as any fullback in the league other than Kyle Juszczyk in San Francisco. And that's obviously pretty tightly tied to Kyle Shanahan. But even the way that they use the fullback, it's very different. You know, Juszczyk is kind of a chess piece in Shanahan's offense, whereas, you know, Alec Ingold, he's there to block for Miami. They almost never target him. But McDaniel almost schemes his offense up in a way where he has so much confidence in getting those guys schemed open on these quick hitting in-breakers or outbreakers that having that extra blocker in there is necessary when he hasn't really beefed up the offensive line, and he wants all these kind of smaller athletes on the offensive line that aren't going to be as naturally good in pass protection. So the way he uses his fullback, I would argue, is very different than Shanahan. But even then, yes, the Niners still use their fullback, but the Dolphins and Niners were the only teams hovering around 30% of 21 personnel usage. The Ravens were down at about 20%. Then you had the Saints and Chargers and Vikings down there at about 14%. Nobody else used a fullback on more than 100 plays in the league last year. So that still leaves Tampa, Green Bay, Jets, Steelers, Falcons, Texans, Bears, Cardinals, Browns, Rams. Like, these are all Shanahan-influenced schemes that just aren't really leaning into that fullback usage. So that's another reason this Dolphins offense does look quite different. And surely you can bring in even more creative wrinkles that Mike McDaniel has done that have been successful for this Dolphins team. But it is a very fun offense, in my opinion. And for that reason, I would love to see him kind of get back on track. I am in no way writing off Mike McDaniel. I'm not even putting him on the hot seat. But there has certainly been a little bit of pump the brakes, not just with all of the schematic conversation where he didn't necessarily bring that new creative wrinkle and take another evolution with his offense, but I do think you do need to bring up some of the inability to have counter punches, to be maybe a little bit one-dimensional with this style of offense at times, where some defense has been able to take away what he does, and he hasn't always been able to adjust, specifically later in seasons. And then, you know, we got to get this locker room under control here. Players going at it with Vic Fangio, like people calling each other soft, star players demanding trades. Like, you know, that's a side of things that I think Mike McDaniel, I hate to say he needs to prove himself, but I don't think we ever viewed Mike McDaniel as this, like, culture overlord of this building. It was more like, hey, this young cat is drawing up some really good plays and he's making us look good, so we respect him as a head coach. I don't know that he's necessarily the, like, leader of men type necessarily. I think at other times he gets a little bit too much crap for that side of his job too, but there is absolutely a side of that part of being a head coach that I think Mike McDaniel's got some areas to prove for sure. But I am still a fan and a believer. But we do have to talk about Anthony Weaver on the defensive side of things, the defensive coordinator in year 2 now, after coming down from Baltimore, really in a wave of hires that the league is looking to replicate the Mike McDonald system around the league, something we've spent a lot of time talking about in this series over the last couple of years. But I think Anthony Weaver did a good job. Something short of a great job, but definitely a good job. He passed the eye test in year 1 in what was not not an impossible season, but a challenging season as a defensive coordinator. He had a bunch of injuries along the defensive line. He did have some guys to work with in the secondary, certainly with guys like Ramsey and Holland. But the Dolphins ultimately end up finishing 19th in DVOA, which is probably just a little bit above where I would have ranked them in terms of roster talent, looking back on the year. So again, a good job for him. I think he deserves solid rankings with an up arrow on him as we head into year 2. I've got him 22nd to 27th for pass defense coaching, and right in that same ballpark, 23rd to 28th for run defense coaching. Still just kind of a relatively unproven guy. We certainly haven't seen greatness from Anthony Weaver yet, but you absolutely have to mention him as a potential head coach candidate if things go well here for Miami, because we know the league is looking for these Mike Macdonald disciples. And he's not just that. He actually has a really impressive resume of working with, reputable defensive minds, Rex Ryan and Mike Pettin, going all the way back to his time with them, with the Jets in Buffalo and in Cleveland. He worked under Romeo Crennel for 5 years in Houston with some really good defenses there. He worked under Wink Martindale after he left Houston and went to Baltimore, and then for a couple of years under Mike Macdonald. So he does have a pretty long list of really all those at their core are kind of attacking 3-4 systems. So he's got a certain brand of defense that he likes to run, but they all have their different spins and turns, making him an experienced, flexible coach, to say the least. But the Mike Macdonald system is really what he was brought in here to run, and that is what he did. And we talked about this in the Titans deep dive. I will hit on some of the same points while also trying to keep it somewhat shorter so we're not overly redundant. If you're unfamiliar, I definitely would recommend checking out this portion of that Titans deep dive or just watch the whole thing. That would be great too. But yeah, the Mike Macdonald system is basically an evolution of the Fangio concepts. Vic Fangio, Dolphins fans very familiar, wants to run a lot of two-shell pre-snap, kind of quarters pre-snap looks, with the threat that those safeties could rotate up or down into a cover 3 hook zone buzz, or split off into cover 2 or cover 6, which is going to be cover 4 on one side of the field and cover 2 on the other half of the field. But using that post-snap rotation to confuse the quarterback while also keeping your safeties deep to prevent explosive plays. And the Macdonald system absolutely lives in that world from a coverage perspective, but they do it in a more aggressive manner. And this really isn't a shot at Vic Fangio. I think Vic Fangio has always understood that you can't just play conservative all game and expect results. It's more of that run of Vic Fangio's disciples, Ed Donatel, Joe Barry, Brandon Staley, that thought they could just live in cover 4 all day or cover 6 and play off coverage all day and survive. And they all did not survive. Those guys have all been fired. But the Macdonald system is much closer to the way Vic Fangio likes to call it, where, yes, those are the core philosophies, but if we got to press a corner on one play, or instead of playing quarters with guys 10 yards off the line, let's bring our corners maybe at about 5-yard depth so that they can't just hit quick outs on us all day. These Macdonald systems have also really introduced, whether they discovered it by accident or not, but using a guy like Kyle Hamilton, a safety, in 3 safety packages as your nickel corner, that also being a way to counteract the idea that, okay, you do want to play in a 2-shell structure where your safeties are outside of the box, you're going to be more susceptible to the run. Well, let's, instead of having a 185-pound slot corner, let's take a Kyle Hamilton, Derwin James with the Chargers and make him our nickel corner so that we get a little bit more run support to kind of counterbalance some of the weaknesses of those Fangio-style defenses. So perhaps these Mike Macdonald defenses are just a little bit more self-aware from a mentality standpoint, a little bit more aggressive, but they're also very different in their fronts. And this system and the coaches coming out of this tree have also become very popular and in high demand around the league because of the way that they've kind of rewired the way that they coach their fronts. They have taken a complete full multiple approach to coaching their D-line and their linebackers, where they want to coach every player in their front seven, every single gap, and know where to rush from any individual play call. And really, instead of coaching your playbook, if you will, through your role in that formation, they're almost throwing the formation side of things out and just asking these players to understand the entire front's role for each individual play. But by eliminating the formation side of things, they only have to learn, let's say, 70 plays instead of 300. So I think it simplifies things. It allows guys to play faster and confident in what they're doing. It allows them to really understand what their role is on the play. If it's a stunt, they understand, hey, last week when I lined up as the 3 technique, I know it was my job to blow up this double team so that the edge rusher could loop in. Having that kind of chemistry and understanding of what your role is, the do your job mentality really comes through when you know what everybody in your front seven is doing. But maybe the most impactful thing that this does is it allows them to just cause complete chaos for the offense. They can come up, line up any defensive lineman in any spot, make the look like this brand new blitz package, when in reality, it's a blitz that this defense has been running all season long. The defense knows what they're running. They've run it all season, but the offense does not know what's coming and where they're coming from. So it really provides some schematic problems for the offense. So you can really tell why this system is at the forefront of what teams are trying to do. We saw everybody trying to go Fangio tree. There was too much conservative nature in those coaches. Not so much with this. They neutralize their weaknesses on the background, and they're also just much more blitz-happy defenses because of that multiple front, because of the attacking nature of this defense, and really the ability to use that threat and have, zone blitz, fire zone droppers underneath your 2-shell coverages that, can still take care of coverage on the back end too. So it's a really nice system. It is what Anthony Weaver is implementing here. I think he did it to a good degree last year, and hopefully they can get things to settle down with this roster so that he can really climb up. I don't know if this is going to be the year to kind of tease the defensive roster breakdown, but I don't think, if it doesn't happen, I don't really think it's Anthony Weaver's problem. And as we saw last year, the floor is still going to be pretty damn good with him, one way or another. It's just a matter of, can he show greatness here and become a legit head coach candidate? Because I think he has that potential. But that is going to conclude the coaching breakdown. It's obviously a group I like, but it is, needless to say, a big year for Mike McDaniel. But let's now get into this roster. We're going to break down every single position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And we'll start there with the quarterback. And honestly, my thoughts on Tua haven't really changed that much, other than we have now seen another year where he struggles to stay healthy, and a year, frankly, where Tyreek Hill wasn't quite the same old Tyreek Hill, and we didn't see quite the same explosiveness from Tua in tandem with that. But still, I have Tua with the same exact ranking for passing grade, 15th passing quarterback in the league. There are some other rushing threats that have passed him up for the overall grade. I think we had him as the 15th overall quarterback last year, now 17th for overall quarterback, but definitely a good quarterback, a tier 3 quarterback when healthy. The idea of that being, yes, it's someone you got to pay eventually, but it's someone that you expect in kind of perfect surroundings. It's someone that you can win a Super Bowl with. And there are obvious, well-discussed drawbacks to having Tua as your franchise quarterback. But there are legitimately good aspects about him as a passer that we can start on a positive note and praise that side of things. I think he is very much in the conversation for being the best anticipatory thrower in the league. His ability to throw into a zone window before the receiver gets there, or, beat man coverage by putting the ball in a spot before the receiver begins his break. It's a real problem for defenses. He can throw guys open. He makes throws that so many quarterbacks just do not make. And it's a rare trait that he has. And it ties directly into the offense that Mike McDaniel calls. His anticipation, his confidence, and his processing it does allow them to lead the league in time to throw, which helps them call the offense around this very thin, athletic, poor pass blocking offensive line, which part of it is by design because of what we talked about with the run game, and part of it is they just have kind of ignored this offensive line, and in large part they've been allowed to ignore the offensive line because of Tua's strengths to get the ball out quickly in a way that so few quarterbacks do in today's game. He also can throw with brilliant touch. It's tough because he does miss throws. There's no way around it, but his just overall placement and when he is on target, like he is so good at leading receivers and throwing it where only his guy can get it. Like he understands ball placement really, really well and can execute, even if I would not describe him as even like top 10 in accuracy because his lack of arm talent, the ball does get away from him. He will sail throws. He will underthrow guys on deep targets. There's a downside to it as well, but he does understand ball placement. He will throw on top of that, like it's a combination of ball placement and anticipation. Like he will throw away from zone defenders as well a lot of the times. So there's a lot of good with his arm. He's also really good in the red zone at extending plays. He's got good pocket presence that seems to come out even more so once he gets down into that red area where he's really good at navigating pressure and buying time for guys to get open down in the red zone and finding guys in scramble mode and finishing drives, turning so many quarterbacks, the Matt Ryans and Derek Carrs of the world, how many frustrations were with those offenses stalling for field goals. Well, Tua is good at finishing drives down by the red zone, and those are legitimate strengths in his game that he needs to be praised for. Like, I don't think Tua just sucks. But at the same time, let's be honest, there are some very serious drawbacks to Tua as your quarterback. And I think Dolphins fans especially are probably, for the most part, at a point where they're more open to this conversation after the way last year went and seeing this year after year after year at this point, just kind of who he is as a quarterback, the injury stuff. For a long time, I've had to go at it with Dolphins fans about Tua. I've felt much less of that this year. I think most Dolphins fans are at a realistic landing spot with who Tua is. He's still going to have his fans that will go down with the ship on him. But there's a variety of weaknesses to Tua, and the number one thing, like far and away the number one thing, is the durability issue. I don't think it's arguable at this point. He is the most injury-prone starting quarterback in the league, and it's not just that. He gets banged up. He had another hip injury that caused him to miss some time this year. That back was a concern coming out of Alabama. He's not the biggest quarterback. The one year he was able to stay healthy was the year he put on all this weight. And then he was like, okay, cool, I'm not injury prone anymore. And he lost all the weight. And then he gets hurt again. It's like, okay, well, we're back to square one, I guess. But, I mean, we can't just avoid this concussion conversation at this point. Last year, he goes down with yet another scary concussion situation. He had to miss 4 games for this one. And that was the one that so many people, you see his good friend, I think his cousin, right? Manti Te'o out there, like, crying on national television, like, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I love you, I care for you, like, think about this. And he decides to keep playing, but this is becoming really scary with this, and it's a sensitive conversation, but it is really hard not to think, like, if he gets hit hard in the head, or, he's had these plays where he slides late, or he's going into, like, I don't think he ended up getting hurt on this play, but there's a play where he throws a pick and he goes in there like head first to make a tackle. It's like he hasn't been the most conscious of his ability to protect his head. If he suffers another concussion, you got to think that's it. I mean, ultimately it will be his decision and for the doctors to make that, but that is where we're at with Tua. And you just have to bring it up because it has gotten that scary. And that doesn't need any further explanation. Like, that is a tough spot to be in for any franchise quarterback. But even his skills, there are drawbacks to him as a quarterback. That anticipation that we praised him for, I think it's generally a good thing and helps him be the level of passer that he is and put up the numbers that he does. But it does hurt him at times. And it plays into what we talked about with Mike McDaniel, maybe not always having that counterpunch and the adaptability. Look, when the offense is humming and they are scheming guys open and he's able to play within the timing of this offense, it is efficient as all hell. They lead the league in numbers, and he looks great. But when he does go against good defenses that understand how to buzz down and take away those intermediate routes, or have linebackers that can take those types of throws away, which not every defense can do, but Tua will throw right into those defenders because he does trust the offense to his own fault at times. And there are some games that are just real stinkers from Tua, not just because he throws those ugly picks, but it plays into the next point where when the play design isn't working, when the system isn't humming, he doesn't bring too much to the table outside of that. And I will say Tua is the most system-dependent quarterback in the league right now. Not even really calling him a system quarterback, though obviously that's where a lot of people's minds are going to go when I say that. But I think he's the most system-dependent quarterback in the sense of like when his unique system is working, the highs are tremendous. And he is able to get the most out of his system in a way that we've seen so many other quarterbacks come in and try to do. Teddy Bridgewater, Jacoby Brissett, Tyler Huntley, like some of these high caliber backups have come in and not been able to run the system like Tua does. Like there is a complementary side of that, but he's also remarkably system dependent in like where's plan B? Where's your counterpunch? What's your changeup? When the infrastructure of that play action oriented intermediate passing game is taken away, we have seen very unstable play from Tua, where he doesn't have the biggest arm to make all these throws. I don't think he's a bad play extender. We praised him for what he does down in the red zone, but you compare him to the top 10 to 15 QBs in the league, Tua can't get out of sacks and make these tremendous out of structure plays to the consistency and degree that so many of the game's great quarterbacks can. I also think because he's so invested in this system, I think his processing and decision-making in the drop-back passing game is good, but it certainly isn't surgical. And you will certainly see a high degree of bad reads where he's forcing things and predetermining reads. And I'll give him some benefit of the doubt and say that's not all on him either. They just have not invested in the offensive line here. In part, it's like it's a blessing and a curse that he is as good as he is within that structure to get that ball out so quickly. Well, if you're going to build this offensive line very thin and not invest in it and have poor pass protection, eventually you are going to have to get into 3rd and 11. And yeah, Tua is kind of like Andy Dalton-esque, if you will, where like, yeah, you kind of got to give him a little bit more time to see things and make the right throw, because he's not going to fire in these crazy tight window throws with this rocket arm or consistently get out of pressure and make something happen. That's just not what his strengths are and who he is as a passer, but it does obviously have its limitations if we're starting to compare him against the game's great quarterbacks. And maybe there is a world where in time things change and they get him better pass pro and we start to see more of kind of like a Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow-esque version where he really is a little bit more surgical as a pocket passer. But that certainly has not been a defining strength in his game to this point in his career. And I really do think this offseason has been a acceptance from this Dolphins organization. They won't say it publicly, right? They will come out and defend Tua and say he's their guy, because why wouldn't you, right? But I do believe internally there has been an acceptance that Tua is just not putting this team in a very realistic position to go get a Super Bowl. So much has to go right. Number one, he's got to get through a season healthy, which he's only shown really once that he can do. And then you got to get to the playoffs. Frankly, hope that you were either good enough to get home field advantage or that you're getting to go play in a dome, which in the AFC, there's not many domed stadiums, because let's be honest, this is a smaller, less physically capable quarterback who has shown that he is more impacted by poor weather conditions than others. That's going to hurt your chances. And then number three, you got to hope that you can go on a run against playoff caliber defenses that aren't able to sort of take away the system throws that he's so effective at. That is almost an impossible combination of things that you need to go right for this to line up where Tua can play at his best and get this team a Super Bowl. And I think the Dolphins have come to the realization of like, all right, we're still dating, but this is no longer an exclusive relationship. Our eyes are open for escape lanes to take some dart throws on guys like Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers. This offseason, it didn't make sense with this draft class or free agency to really make a splash and replace Tua, right? He's still fresh off the contract. They need to, get some of that money off the books before they were to spend money on a quarterback. And this draft class wasn't a great option for them either, obviously, after Cam Ward. So they're going to defend Tua as they should, and he is still currently their best option for 2025. But I do believe internally they are going to be evaluating this quarterback class quite heavily, or if there is a veteran quarterback that they view as an upgrade, I do think they are entering into a mentality change where they would be prepared to make that change at any given moment. And I think a lot of Dolphins fans have made that mentality shift as well. Not all Dolphins fans, but I firmly believe that that is where we're at here with the Tua conversation, where this team is starting to be a little bit more realistic about the fact that hitching their wagon to him is just, it's never going to put them in a ideal situation to compete for a Super Bowl. Barring, of course, the Tua evaluation changes and he becomes a different quarterback than we've known him to be the last 3 years. And that is kind of why the Zach Wilson signing is perfect here. They weren't in a position to invest in much, but we are on a run throughout the league where we've seen Sam Darnold emerge as a nice starting quarterback. We saw Baker Mayfield bounce back after just getting passed around the league. We saw Geno Smith at 35 years old. Seeing Zach Wilson in a Mike McDaniel offense at 26 years old, when really his only chance to play was with the New York Jets, after a year, by the way, of getting coached by Sean Payton in Denver, Zach Wilson breaking back through, frankly, wouldn't even be that big of a surprise to me at this point. And I'll just come out and say it because I've said it multiple times before. People always love to ask me, whether it's out on the streets or in a Twitch stream or on Twitter, what's your hottest NFL take for 2025? And mine is that Zach Wilson ends up playing, unfortunately, very likely because of a Tua Tagovailoa injury, and that Zach Wilson has the sort of Geno, Baker, Sam Darnold arc and is their starting quarterback in 2026. That's my hot take. Am I promising that happens? No, of course not. But did I just draft Zach Wilson in the 27th round of a dynasty draft? You better effing believe it, because it's not just me talking out my ass. I think Zach Wilson has the traits, arm talent, pocket presence, athletic ability. He has now been humbled. And in this offense, can I see him having success? Yes, 100%. And I really like the addition from Miami here. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Again, I'm not guaranteeing anything, but it is possible. And then Quinn Ewers as a 7th round pick, I'm not going to oversell this. My Spark Notes version of the Quinn Ewers analysis is when he's healthy, he's got a pretty big arm. His 10 best throws were probably up there with the 10 best throws of any quarterback in this draft, which isn't saying that much, but probably someone that I'm letting someone else draft because he has some of the worst pocket presence I've ever seen. He's remarkably streaky and just doesn't pass the eye test for me. But 7th round pick for a guy that was hurt last year, had a tremendous fall in the draft, probably should have gone back to school, but he doesn't. So again, just like a why not 7th round dart throw, 1% chance he turns into something here. 99% chance, whatever. It's a 7th round pick. Who cares? But that is where I'm at with this quarterback room. Again, Tua, when healthy, a good NFL quarterback. They come in with the 17th overall quarterback ranking for me, but there's much more to it than that, obviously. And I think that is where the majority of people are at now as we discuss Tua and this QB room. But I mentioned in the intro, this video is a weird one. There are so many aspects of this team that are difficult to rank. Just, we don't know where this team is at. And this group of weapons is the next part of this story. So I had no idea really where to rank this group of Dolphins weapons. I have them with an A- grade, 7th to 8th in the league. There is no doubt that a full force Tyreek Hill plus Jalen Waddle is just a cheat code for this entire Dolphins offense. And last year, when we felt like these guys were still in their prime, I had them either first or second for weapons, because not only are they great players, obviously, but the speed factor brings just another element to the table that just makes this group so uncoverable and opens up everything we've discussed with this design of this Dolphins offense. Their ability to get to those spots in the timing of this offense with that speed and to do what they do after the catch between Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, it's just different. It's just different. But what the hell is Tyreek Hill for the 2025 Dolphins, coming off the first year in his career where he didn't surpass 1,000 yards? Not only that, but at 31 years old, like, he only had 4 receptions of 20 plus yards down the field. Yes, he had 20 plus yard receptions, catching the ball intermediate and running beyond 20 yards on the catch, but only 20 receptions of air yard targets where he's catching the ball deep down the field. That is not Tyreek Hill, right? Now, I don't think it was all him. The offense took so many steps back. But I do think Tyreek Hill being the fastest player in the NFL, that ship maybe has sailed. But that doesn't mean he isn't top 5 in speed. And it's not always just been the speed with Tyreek Hill. His agility, change of direction, acceleration is also a huge part of what he does. And I still see that in his game as well. Maybe not prime Tyreek Hill, but it's still in there. And like, you see him out there training for the Olympics. There's reports that he looks as fast as ever. Of course, you're going to get those types of reports in the offseason. But I've always said, like, regression is not always this straight line. Sometimes 30, 31-year-old guys, like, they just do have down years. Or maybe they were dealing with something that was hampering them a little bit. Sports medicine is at a truly special place where Tyreek Hill can still be a special player at 31 years old and better than he was last year. But he also, like, yeah, maybe he is regressing. Maybe he is even worse than he was last year. Maybe he does get traded somewhere else because he's been loud about his existence on this Dolphins team, especially if they start losing games. This could go in so many different directions. I've got an 87 rating on him because it is hard to know what to do with him. But he could be more of a low 80s type of guy, a high 70s type of guy, or he could get something closer to what he would have been in his prime, which is like a TFG 99 club type of guy. He is such a wild card for this Dolphins team and makes this thing so weird, especially because of the fact that he might just not be on this team at some point. So that's very self-explanatory. I don't feel the need to get even further into Tyreek Hill's skill set. This has been one of the most well-documented superstar game-changing weapons in the NFL for a long time now. It's just a matter of where is he at this point in his career. And it does make this an extremely difficult ranking to place on this Dolphins team. So he gets the up and down yellow arrow. He gets that wild card graphic on there, all of it. Only time will tell what we get from him. But then you do have Jalen Waddle next to him. Obviously, you're not so much worried about age regression or losing speed with him. He's, 25, 26 years old. But it is worth noting that he did get a little bit caught up in the suck last year. He, for the first time in his career, also does not go over 1,000 yards. He also continued to have drop issues where he's been about a 9 to 10% drop rate guy every year of his career. He had another 6 drops last year for a 9.4% drop rate. That is on the wrong end of trustworthiness. He's also been a 30% contested catch guy since his rookie year, where he managed to come down with 70% of his contested catch targets. He has very much stalled out right now in that wide receiver 2 category, where, yes, he's a speed threat. He's got the vertical ability, no doubt. He can track the deep ball, even if he has some drops on those targets. There are plays where he will outrun an entire defense. But he has, I don't want to call him one-dimensional, but I would say There are aspects of becoming sort of a true number one wide receiver that he has lacked. And I think the ball skills are a big part of it, but the size and contested catch ability is a drawback in his game too. So I think you're just fine if Waddle is what he is. I'm not saying he has to get better, but he certainly hasn't shown those heights of a peak Tyreek Hill, who does somehow like catch contested catches, did clean up his drop rates, does have a pretty diverse route tree. I mean, sure, maybe in his 5th season, Waddle figures it out. I'm not necessarily betting on that. I view him in that crop of like the best wide receiver 2s in the league. Your Devonta Smiths and T. Higgins. And that's frankly a great place to be with a Waddle as your number 2 if Tyreek Hill is your number 1. But as we saw last year, that the dynamics of that change when Tyreek Hill isn't playing like peak Tyreek Hill. But I do want to say this about the Dolphins. I do think they're heading into next season less dependent on that dynamic of just those 2 guys than they've been in previous years in this offense. The addition of Nick Westbrook-Akine, the emergence of Jonnu Smith as a number 2 target in this offense at points last year, and Devon Achane really establishing himself as a constant in this receiving game. Those guys do count. And frankly, if we were just talking about Hill and Waddle and the potential regression of Tyreek Hill, I probably would have ranked the Dolphins even a little bit lower than an A- grade, ranking 7th to 8th in the league. But I do think these guys lift the boat a little bit more where I'm comfortable with putting them at that ranking. And let's talk about Jonnu Smith, because Jonnu, as the Dolphins were, playing Tyler Huntley and kind of got themselves out of the playoff mix by the end of the season. And, it was just a lot of negative narratives with the Dolphins last year. Jonnu Smith, he had a career year, dude, and he's holding out for a nice contract, deservedly so. Like, the Dolphins should absolutely pay Jonnu Smith. I really hope they do. He makes so much sense within the infrastructure of this offense as an underneath target, off of RPOs, play action, all of it, and just plays so nicely with the rest of this group. He was 4th in receptions for tight ends last year, 5th in yards, 2nd in touchdowns, 9th in run after catch, where he's always been special, 4th in missed tackles forced, and he was even 18th in contested catch percentage, which that's never been a huge strong suit in his game, but that's, a good solid mark for a starting tight end. He's only 30 years old. Actually, he turns 30 in August. So he's not even 30 years old yet. There's plenty of meat still on the bone on Jonnu Smith's career, who has had a lot of success in similar style offenses, specifically going back to his time in Tennessee. There's plenty of meat on the bones to give him a 3-year deal at a tight end position that's probably undercompensated anyway, probably a 3-year, $30 million deal for Jonnu Smith. Like, go get it done. He's a real piece here. Like, fantasy football, if that contract comes in, which I do think it will, I think Jonnu Smith will probably resume, which the second, those numbers I read to you, that's considering the fact that they didn't even fully know how to use him until about a third of the way through the season. So, like, Jonnu could easily have a top 6 or 7 tight end finish. And I don't know his exact ADP, but I don't think he's going that in that range in your home drafts or your underdog best ball. So, like, go get yourself some Jonnu Smith. I think he's underrated at this point for this Dolphins team. And he also gets the up and down arrow because, frankly, he played higher than that 80 rating in that last half of the season last year. But that is a little bit of an outlier on what he's been over the last 3-4 years. So there's always a chance that he kind of just got hot or whatever. But there's definitely a chance that this is just a really good home for him, and he kind of lands as a top 10 or so tight end on this Dolphins team, especially as a receiving threat. He's not the best run blocker, but certainly as a receiving threat, that's the territory we're talking about with him. And then, Achane, I mean, we have more to talk about with him as in the backfield portion here, but he is obviously a real problem in the screen game. I would love to see even more from him in terms of route running and catching the ball down the field. I think there's an aspect of his game, especially because they do sometimes line him up on the slot and stuff. There's an aspect of his game there that could still be unlocked that isn't quite there yet, but definitely a problem after the catch. That kind of speaks for itself. And then the Nick Westbrook-Akine edition is perfect here. This was like my kind of football nerd, like favorite move that a team made, which, for a Chris Greer-led front office that have been pretty hard on it, it's good to see them kind of make such a really just smart addition here that fits so well. They've spent so much time with the Odell Beckham signing, and not to be hard on Malik Washington, but like the Malik Washington, Taj Washington draft picks, they go and get Chase Claypool. It's been all these speed additions, and they finally woke up and they're like, wait a minute, like hold on. We don't need more speed. We have the most speed on the field of anybody. We got Hill and Waddle and Achane. We don't need a third guy to design targets for. That's only going to take away from Hill and Waddle. No, we need a dude that plays at 215 pounds, that is regarded as one of, if not the best run blocking receivers in the entire league, that is incredibly clutch, by the way, is always going to be in the right place at the right time, is tough after the catch on RPOs and that kind of stuff. He is going to be a best friend for Tua when he has to scramble and Tyreek Hill and Waddle are 25 yards down the field. Westbrook-Akine is going to be the guy that reacts to zone coverage and is QB friendly and scramble drill. He can be a bigger bodied red zone target for you. He is the perfect addition, and his impact on this offense probably goes above the 75 rating that I put on him. All of the little things he does just add up. And in a Titans offense that they kind of needed him to be like a legit part of their design passing game, like, yeah, he can't really do that. He's not much of a he's not a separator one-on-one at all. But plugged into this infrastructure, I think this was such a good signing. And I think they knew it. That's why they actually gave him a 2-year contract here. So really a fan of that. And obviously it's a good way to round out the conversation with this group of weapons. So I think you can see, like, I think the sticker shock, like, oh, are the Dolphins really 7th to 8th in weapons at this point in their regime? Like, what is Tyreek Hill? I think those are very fair questions. But I think the 3, 4, 5 targets are in a better spot than they've been in the entire Mike McDaniel era. Now, they don't have a ton of exciting depth. There's some guys to bring up. I think Malik Washington, absolutely. Like, especially in the world where Tyreek Hill is getting phased out here. I think we probably see Tyreek Hill play out the year here, but maybe not. But, I think Malik Washington for 2026 and beyond is certainly interesting. He has a lot of potential to be that speed option in this offense. He looked the part when he played last year. It was very minimal looks. He's been a bit of a streaky player, but like, he can move. And if he continues to develop his routes, develop better hands, like, he is absolutely someone to keep on your fantasy football watch lists. If there's a Tyreek Hill trade or in your dynasty leagues, like, yes, there's potential there. It's nothing proven, but he would be the receiver depth that is fascinating here. And of course, as a backup, it's nice to have that skill set if Hill or Waddle are going to get banged up. And then you got Eric Ezukanma, possession receiver. Not much really there, in my opinion. In fact, Andrew Armstrong, I would almost bet on him to take that wide receiver 5 spot. I thought for sure he would get drafted. He's not the best athlete. That's ultimately why he didn't go drafted. But catches everything. Smart dude. Tough through traffic. Like, he to me is a NFL backup wide receiver 4 or 5 type. And that's what I think they were hoping they were going to get in Eric Ezukanma. That's why they signed Nick Westbrook-Akine. Armstrong doesn't quite have the physical presence of a Westbrook-Akine to be kind of your half tight end type of guy. But similar idea where you want to just smart, sound possession wide receiver. He was a continuation of this shift in how they're building this team to get stronger and smarter as opposed to faster. Obviously, they didn't draft him, but someone should have. I'll say that. So I like him as wide receiver depth. And then you've got like, all right, Taj Washington unfortunately missed his rookie season. This is effectively his rookie year. You return man, in my opinion. Some people like him as, his route running and stuff. I think he's a little too small. Maybe, but him and D. Eskridge, former second-round pick for the Seahawks, those are your kind of speed, special team, compete for a roster spot types, and then you got some other undrafted fluff in there. Theo Weiss had some fans. I didn't see much, frankly. Made some tough catches, sure. But I liked Andrew Armstrong a lot more in that mold. Your tight end room, we can pretty much gloss over. They bring in the veteran Pharaoh Brown. For whatever it's worth, I like him more than Durham Smythe. Julian Hill and Tanner Connor are kind of those flex blockers that they like to use. We also probably are shortchanging Alec Ingold by not putting him in there with that group, because those are all kind of your blocking specialists, but none of them really play into the weapons formula. Jalen Conyers as well was on my radar as a draftable prospect, like late day 3 type. So I didn't want to put the eyeballs on him because I didn't actually get to his tape. He was on my late watch list that I didn't get to. But, if you're going off consensus rankings and stuff, that's a pickup to keep an eye on to maybe make this team as a real tight end, whereas Connor and Hill are more flex players. And then it's going to be mostly Achane catching passes here. We'll see if Jalen Wright can take that step. He didn't catch balls successfully at Tennessee. Didn't do so last year for the Dolphins in his rookie season. Frankly, Alexander Madison's probably going to be in a discussion to be on the field more than Jalen Wright on third downs. Doesn't bring the same juice, which they obviously prefer out of that running back spot with how they use those guys. But Madison can actually pass block and has done some stuff in the receiving game in years past. And then Ollie Gordon as well, in kind of a Samaje Perine type of way, has a chance. Like, he's got the size to pass block. He actually showed some smooth hands in the receiving game. We'll talk more about him as a runner, but that rounds out your depth. So this ranking could go up or down, frankly, based on the conversations we had about Tyreek Hill and Jonnu Smith. I'm probably not betting on us getting back to the point where I think last year I called Tyreek Hill the most impactful non-quarterback in the NFL. Probably not quite getting to that dynamism, but I do think he could, there's a chance he's better than he was last year, and we're still talking about this as a really special group. But if Tyreek continues to regress, this is probably more of a mid-ranging group of weapons in the 15-ish range. And then we've got this backfield, which it's not quite as weird as our previous 2 conversations, but it is another tough group for me to rank because I love Devon Achane, but he is the smallest starting running back in the league and is quite clearly a guy that can't be like a bell cow. So the backup plays a little bit more of a prominent role in this running back ranking than I think most teams in the league. Like, best case scenario, you're talking about probably a 60% touch load for Achane, at least a carry load, especially because they do love to use him in the receiving game. So behind Achane, it's not the best group of backups, right? You got Jalen Wright, who showed some flashes, but is very unproven as an athletic guy out of Tennessee. And you got Alexander Madison, who we know what he is as a kind of tough, short yardage back. But that does lead to the Dolphins being ranked 20th to 22nd in the NFL. Even if I would say Devon Achane is pushing top 10 running back status. But the juice Achane brings out of the backfield is one of the better things this Dolphins team does have going on, right? And also, like, his 592 receiving yards, like we mentioned, like, that played into the weapons ranking, solidifying that A- grade there too. But this is much more a conversation about the run game, and as good as Achane is in that explosive setting, he has his shortcomings as a running back as well. At 5'8", 188 pounds, when he gets moving, he can absolutely run through arm tackles, and he's got some shiftiness, of course, to make guys miss. But in a phone booth or in some of these cold weather games where you're trying to bring that physical element, he's just not an enforcing runner, right? I don't want to go as far as saying it's laughable at times, but it's just impractical at times, like giving him these between the tackles runs on like have to have it short yardage carries, right? So he's a little bit more one-dimensional, but man, on these tosses and the wide zone stuff and the screen game and the reverses out of the slot, like, dude, his ability to make that first, slot corner or outside linebacker miss, to pull away from defenses, breakaway runs, like he's got game-changing ability. Absolutely. And I would expect his own production to shatter this like ranking for this series, right? We're not going to look back on the year and he's between 20th and 22nd in rushing yards. He's going to have some of those monster games in the right game scripts, certainly. But I do think some of those shortcomings should be factored in here. And that's really where like Jalen Wright to a degree and even the Alexander Mattison signing come in. Wright's not the biggest guy, but at 5'11", 210 pounds, they're hoping that he can really emerge through as something like what Raheem Mostert was for this team with Achane in 2023. Mostert was banged up and not the same guy last year at like 33 years old. And because of that, we got to see limited looks from Jalen Wright. It was really just one big game where he had 13 carries for 86 yards. We got really excited and then just kind of didn't do much with the rest of his touches, frankly, from that point on. Felt like his workload actually became less and less as the year went on. And he kind of gave us less reason to be excited about his sort of vision and toughness as a runner. And I'm willing to put the up arrow on him. I obviously don't have him rated too high for those looking at the graphic there. And he's got to prove himself before this running back ranking can climb up. But, as a 4th round pick, that felt about right. There was just a little bit something missing with him. He's got the speed, he's got the big play threat ability, but, whether it was the anticipation with his vision or just missing a little bit of nastiness to him, there's just a little bit more I want to see from him for sure. But they're hopeful, and it's reasonable to be hopeful for him. He definitely has the physical talent. There's no denying that. So we'll see what they can get from him. But they do know what they have in Alexander Mattison, short yardage specialist, which I do think is very useful here. Like we mentioned, like Jalen Wright, super unproven and not the biggest guy. Alexander Mattison is a no-nonsense north and south runner, and there are times where the Dolphins need to put their foot in the grass and get you a yard, get you 2 yards. And Madison's going to be good in that sense. And I think from a pass blocking perspective as well, I know this is the backfield run game breakdown, but he's not an amazing pass blocker, but he certainly gives you more than Achane and Wright can give you. So he's going to have his usefulness. I think it was a nice, solid sign to bring him in, and he's going to see the field. I do believe that. I don't think it's going to be enough to, like, take away from Achane's fantasy usefulness or anything like that. But it could be the case where if Jalen Wright doesn't really, stand out in camp and early in the season, that this is more of a Achane-Madison combo backfield, and that's why you signed Madison, to raise the floor in case Jalen Wright doesn't take that step forward. But he just doesn't have the upside to be something closer to what Raheem Mostert was for them. And then they bring in Ollie Gordon in the 6th round. I wasn't the biggest Ollie Gordon guy. He's very heavy-footed, not particularly fast, but once upon a time was kind of a way too early mock draft kind of guy and just had a really, really disappointing final season at Oklahoma State. But it was kind of a similar idea where they're looking for some more size and enforcing ability. I think he probably needs to drop some weight, add a little bit more burst. I don't want to say take better care of his body, but just like get more functional athleticism in there. He just didn't look like an NFL athlete last year. I think he looked a little bit more like that the year before. So it was a fun dart throw to take in the 6th round. I'm not necessarily counting on anything there, but crazier things have happened, I suppose, than Ollie Gordon emerging as a fun, like full-sized complement to a Devon Achane, who, as we very much mentioned, needs a running mate. And preferably someone that can do the stuff he can't do as more of a full-sized back. But then you have the QB run multiplier. Very quick conversation with the Dolphins. They don't run Tua for good reason. They want to limit his hits. But you do get kind of the bare minimum because of the RPO and play action boot aspect of this Dolphins offense. It does at least hold backside ends the way that Tua impacts this run game to a degree. So a C grade there, 22nd to 28th for the QB run multiplier. So there's your backfield. Again, a tough group to rank, I do love the explosive aspect of Devon Achane, and when it's on, it's beautiful. But he does feel a little bit week to week with his play style, and they need that complementary number 2 that they didn't have last year. We saw a big dip in their run game last year with Raheem Mostert falling off. Having that piece next to Achane is very important, and we'll see if they can find that in Jalen Wright this year. But let's talk about this Dolphins offensive line. Not going to come as a surprise here, but this group is a work in progress at best. A lot of question marks here. They come in ranked 31st for the overall offensive line. The overall run blocking isn't terrible. They come in 25th for run blocking, but the pass blocking is dead last in the NFL for me. So let's go through it. I don't know that this is going to be that long of a conversation. I mean, you got Patrick Paul at left tackle stepping in for Teron Armstead, a second-round pick last year that was just, simply put, a traits-based developmental prospect that was not ready for his rookie season. When he did play as a rookie, I think you saw some flashes with his athleticism on tosses and stuff, where there's some potential in this run game for him to do some really impressive things. But he does need to kind of figure everything else out as a run blocker in terms of knowing his assignments, getting off the ball quickly, moving guys north and south. And as a pass blocker, he has all the traits, but from his feet to his hands to his head, he's just all over the place. So he's coming in with kind of a developmental grade, and this is going to be up to him and the coaching staff to show that he can be a starting caliber player. And I don't think we really need to go much further than that. At left guard, you got James Daniels, who, when healthy, is the best player on this offensive line. This is kind of like a slightly more reliable version of the Isaiah Wynn signing for Dolphins fans, but still comes with a similar level of risk. James Daniels has missed a bunch of time in his career. Like I said, not quite as bad as the consistency of injuries with an Isaiah Wynn. For example, from 2021 to 2023, he actually didn't have any health concerns at all. But he is coming off a torn Achilles from week 4 of last season. That is going to be a question mark in terms of recovery from that and getting back to speed. But early in his career, he missed a ton of time. He missed about 5 weeks in his rookie season, played all the way through his sophomore season, or second season. And then 2020, he also went down with a torn pec and missed the final 3 quarters of that season. So we know when healthy, James Daniels is a good starting caliber player. He has never really emerged as like some incredible top 10 guard or anything like that, but I'll say this, his contract would have been bigger than 3 years, $24 million if you could guarantee his health, but that was baked into the contract. So it's right in line with some of these risky O-line signings they've made, like Wynn and even Teron Armstead had, kind of came with the billing that you got to expect him to miss 5 games a year, and that's exactly what happened. So this is familiar territory for the Dolphins. It doesn't mean it's a bad signing. I think for that price, that's about what I would have paid James Daniels. And if he does get healthy and can fully recover from that Achilles, he's really the perfect fit. Like, he is a tremendous athlete for this blocking system as a puller, can get on the move. Like, compared to what they had with like Robert Jones, like that could be a night and day upgrade at left guard if healthy. And then at center, this is kind of the definition of that lightweight, run block, athletic-oriented lineman that we've been kind of discussing with a lot of these guys. Aaron Brewer, where he's the smallest starting offensive lineman in the league. He plays about 6'1", 285 pounds. He's like half fullback, half offensive center. Super athletic, super smart, super tough. He's kind of maximized what a player like this can be in the NFL, because from a play strength perspective, he's just going to be limited, right? Like, he just doesn't have the mass to move big defensive tackles off the ball, but he can get sticky as a run blocker, and certainly when they toss him, on these sweeps and stuff, like he's a weapon in the run game. So they use him well, and that when their play action oriented passing game is working, he can move and not be a complete liability in pass protection. But as a drop back pass blocker, you damn well better make sure you're giving him double team help, because most defensive tackles are going to take him for a ride straight at the quarterback. So he's got his deficiencies, but he's got his strengths. He's probably the most polarizing offensive lineman in the league in that sense. High end strengths in one end and high end weaknesses in the other. At right guard, Jonah Savaiinaea. Love the draft pick in the second round. That's right around the range I had him going. Just exceptionally raw athlete, making a move inside, played tackle at Arizona. The technique is a work in progress. It is. There's reps you see from him that were really exciting. There's reps where it's like, hey, Jonah, you just stopped your feet. Or why did you let the 5 technique cross your face when we're running wide zone to your side of the field? Like, just all of the raw things for a young, developing offensive lineman. But the way he can move, the play strength, he is a rare combination of traits for this position. And I love the scheme fit because of that athleticism. And he kind of gives you the best of both worlds if everything comes along, where he actually could be a lineman that can block all of the athletic demands of a guard in this system, but also not be a liability in pass pro. So it's probably not all going to be pretty out the gate, let's be honest. But in time, he could be a real asset for them. And then you got Austin Jackson at right tackle. I think we know what he is at this point. He is an athlete. He's gone from liability to like okay-ish starter. He still struggles to anchor against good power rushers. His pass blocking technique still isn't perfect. And as a run blocker, he's just not that strong. Doesn't have that much of that kind of dickhead mentality that you look for. Like he's done some good stuff in the run game. He's survived in this system as a pass blocker. He's someone you kind of want to be your weakest link in many ways. And if everything goes well, maybe in time he can be. But realistically, they should probably keep their eyes open to replace Austin Jackson in time, which rounds out your group of starters. So between the developmental aspects of Patrick Paul and Savaiinaea, where you really don't know what you're getting here and expecting some learning curves early, and the injury concerns on James Daniels and the polarizing nature of Aaron Brewer, it just ain't a great offensive line, man. It just is not. And there's not a ton of depth to speak of. I think Larry Borum as a backup tackle signing is fine. That's what he is. There's not really any other tackles to speak of other than maybe Braden Daniels. Honestly, they've got him listed at tackle. They bring him in from Dallas. He was a 4th-round pick that never really played out of Utah. But honestly, really athletic guy as James Daniels' backup as a guard? Maybe. Just because of the athleticism point on him. Then you got, Liam Eichenberg. He's played a bunch for this team. Dolphins fans are happy that, at least that he's a backup now. Jackson Carman they bring in from Cincinnati. He had he was a 2nd-round pick. In his 2nd year, he showed maybe he could play and then went right back to having issues in pass protection and really just not a heady run blocker at all. So they are very thin on the offensive line, which isn't a big surprise because they needed starters first and still, frankly, are looking for some starters. They do, however, get one of the best boosts in the league from their skill blocking players. Between Alec Ingold and Nick Westbrook-Akine, they do have some good contributors there. So 2nd to 4th, getting a 2% boost to the run blocking grade from those guys. Ultimately, a total work in progress group that if things go well with Paul and Savaiinaea, you could at least come out of this season feeling like they're building towards something on this offensive line, which for a couple of years it's been, you got Teron Armstead, and that's basically been it. So that rounds out your offense. Obviously all over the place, a very challenging group to rank. They ended up coming in 20th offensively for me. Obviously not back to the peak of what was a top 10 offense, in this group's prime. The splits there are 17th in passing game and 22nd in run game. And yes, the Jags were just 17th in passing game. They got bumped just down to 18th here. That's going to happen in the series, you guys. I make the rankings in May, and then I'm spending individual time on these teams, watching film, doing research. And in this case, I ended up feeling better about that group of Jonnu Smith and Achane and Nick Westbrook-Akine that I bumped up the Dolphins group of weapons from what I had them in May. And that just was slightly enough to bump the Dolphins up to 17th here. So that kind of tweaking and stuff is going to happen. Just a reminder to you guys. And I do publish the final spreadsheet on Patreon at the end of the season for free on Patreon there, just so you can see the final rankings there. But probably needed to be said. Ultimately, this group can definitely end up better than 20th. We've seen these guys play better than that. But what do we get from Tyreek Hill? Can Mike McDaniel kind of get his mojo back with the passing game? And I would say the backfield too. Like, I do think it's important that someone other than Devon Achane can be a good member of that backfield for them. I think top 10 potential is still on the table for this team because we've seen it. But at the same time, this was the 22nd ranked offense in the league last year, and they got to get back to doing that. But let's talk some defense, shall we? And our theme of things just being weird with this Dolphins team continue, and just kind of not always knowing how to rank these guys. I mean, how do you rank this Dolphins defensive line? I struggled with this last year. So many Dolphins fans, I think I had them like 26th, 27th for pass rush. And they were like, are you kidding me? Like, look at this group. You got Jalen Phillips, you got Bradley Chubb, you got a rookie in Chop Robinson. How is that possibly, bottom 10 in the league for pass rush? Well, they didn't end up getting anything from Phillips and Chubb last year. And do I feel that much more confident this year that that's going to happen? I mean, I feel slightly more confident, but it's still a huge question. And it's more like, okay, I think Phillips coming off of a week 4 partially torn ACL, and Bradley Chubb, who last year was heading into the year coming off a late season ACL tear. He ended up just shutting it down, missing the whole season. I actually feel much better that those guys will be back and ready to go. But, dude, the injury history on these guys is unlike most defenders in the league. These guys just can't stay healthy. I mean, Chubb had issues in Denver. He's had issues here. He's now had 2 ACL injuries. It took him, obviously, an extended period of time to recover from this one. So not only is it, can he stay healthy, but what version of himself is Bradley Chubb for a guy that already, wasn't the most explosive pass rusher? He's a good pass rusher, but there is, a line where if you're already not the most juiced up dude, and you lose another quarter step off of that, for example, is he an impact player? What he is and how much they get from Bradley Chubb, complete wild card. I don't care who you ask, whether it's some rando off the street or Mike McDaniel, you're going to get as much of a chance of getting the right answer on what we get from Bradley Chubb this year. And then Jalen Phillips. Look, I don't want to keep this all negative and act like they're not going to get anything from any of these guys. I think Phillips I feel a little bit better about, but let's be honest. Coming off a partially torn ACL, same deal with Chubb, where it's like, okay, are you back to full speed? And can you stay healthy? But he had the torn Achilles a couple years ago. Look, ultimately, I do have the Dolphins' pass rush grade higher than I had it last year. Obviously, a part of that is the emergence of Chop Robinson as well. But I think in Phillips' case, there's probably more reason to be optimistic. He's younger. I think the fact that it was a partially torn ACL is more encouraging than, what Chubb is going through, but obvious questions there as well. He's a guy, I mean, not that I'm not pulling for Bradley Chubb, but I am really pulling for Jalen Phillips. This guy has been through it, man. He had forced retirement issues back with concussions at UCLA, ends up getting cleared, ends up a first round pick, looks awesome. Then the Achilles, then the bounce back, then the ACL tear. Now we're here. It has been a gauntlet for Jalen Phillips. He reminds me of Royce Lewis for my Minnesota Twins, where there's no doubt that the talent is there, but the injuries are just stacking up and up and up and up to the point that you just don't know if you can really count on him as a member of the future of this Dolphins team. They've kind of entered all right, Chop Robinson, we hit on that draft pick. We'll talk about Chop. Anything we can get from Jalen Phillips, who, at least fortunately for the Dolphins, he's entering a contract year, so they can at least not have to, get screwed by the Bradley Chubb injury in the way that they did, where they paid Bradley Chubb and then he got hurt. At least, all right, they can head in, see if he's healthy, and then consider paying him. But I do think it's very fair to say, complete crapshoot in terms of those two guys right there. Now, the rest of this group I do think is in a better spot, or at least the floor of this group is in a much better spot than it was last year. Regardless of Phillips and Chubb, last year we also had questions about, Chop Robinson being kind of a raw prospect coming out, like just how much were they going to get from him right away. He has hit, and he looks awesome as a rookie. And then they have a new first-round pick in Kenneth Grant, and Zach Sealer had kind of a career year last year. So they do still have pieces in that they aren't so dependent on Phillips and Chubb, and they can take a little bit more of that anything you get from those guys is house money approach. But let's keep it on the edge, and then we'll bounce inside to wrap up this conversation. So Chop Robinson, like I said, absolute slam dunk, first-round pick, was just so much better out the gate than I expected. Like, hand up. I thought the pick was interesting. I think I could give it like a B grade, so I didn't hate the pick, but I at least had some questions about like, all right, you got these other two edge rushers. Chop, to me, was someone that at Penn State really just won with the speed rush. I loved the potential, but I was scared there was maybe a little bit of Vic Beasley in his game too. And the Dolphins were so spot on right, not just to kind of hedge against the injuries to Phillips and Chubb, but that they could, get production out of him very quickly. And midway through his rookie season, it was full go time for Chop Robinson. And he really feels to me like he's at least on kind of a Brian Burns type of trajectory. I'm not ready to make any proclamations about, if Chop Robinson can or can't become an elite, like tier 1 Parsons, Bosa level rusher. Let's see year 2. But I at least think comparing him to like a young Brian Burns, it's not a perfect parallel, but just the elite first step, the elite bend, and then like Brian Burns coming into the league very raw, but kind of like pretty quickly developing a bull rush for a guy that was pretty damn undersized coming out and learning really how to pair that get off, that first step, and convert speed to power. Because you don't have to be 270 pounds to bull rush someone. In fact, that first step and the ability to convert that speed to power is honestly much more important. And he learned how to do that very quickly in a way that he didn't really do at Penn State. And that takes repetition. It takes work ethic and a go-getter mentality. And it takes a lot of hand-eye coordination to be able to pair that first step with being able to land those hands inside. But the second he figured that out, you could see the difference. Not only just winning with that bull rush and getting pressures off of it, but the way that opens everything up for him. Because really all he needs is the threat of that speed to bend, where his first step, his ability to threaten that corner and the 4.4 speed or whatever, that's an elite trait that he had. But he just didn't have a whole lot of anything else coming out. But now that the bull rush is a threat, he has that elite threat of the bend around the corner with the speed rush. And then he does have inside counters. I think that's the next step for him, is like really not just developing those inside counter moves, whether it's the spin moves and the swipes, like those come in very small flashes right now. I think that can become an even bigger part of his package. But beyond that, like having that pass rush plan, knowing when to go to different moves, like that's just the next step in his development. But getting that bull rush this early, I just can't say enough about how much that meant to his game. And then the other shortcoming for him is run defense. He's just not a good run defender. Wasn't coming out, wasn't in his rookie year. That's not what they need from him right now. Like a young Brian Burns, he can at least develop some instincts, bulk up a little bit. You don't want him to bulk up too much because you don't want him to lose that elite first step and the speed. But I don't think it's really effort issue for Chop Robinson. It's a size issue for him. But the arrow at this point absolutely pointing up on Chop Robinson. And I am happy to admit in this case that I was way too low on what he was going to be as a rookie. And he's a guy I'm really excited to watch. He's a fun pass rusher, man. The edge depth, there's really not much to speak of. Quentin Bell, another kind of speed threat that's been around as a special teamer and stuff. He kind of had a quote-unquote career year as a rotational player last year, kind of emerged as a guy you can get on the field a little bit more often, do a little bit of everything. Mo Camara, pass rushing specialist coming out of Colorado State. Thought we might be able to get a little bit more from him in his rookie year. I don't think there was much of a technical curve for him at the next level. Not the traitsiest player, and things just didn't really click for him. So, yeah, at this point, anything you can get from him is house money. Grayson Murphy was an athlete coming out of UCLA. In my opinion, the lesser of the two Murphy twins. And then Derek McClendon, like their edge depth is really quite poor. At this point in time, they're kind of counting on Jalen Phillips or Bradley Chubb to be healthy for them. If injuries pop up on those two guys, I would think almost certainly we see them pick someone else up, whoever is out there, whether it's a Zadarius Smith or bring in Tyus Bowser back or something like that, because it is scary thin after those top three guys. But yeah, then the interior of the defensive line, you got Zach Sealer, super steady, good player, man. Actually ends up getting his first double-digit sack season last year. It was not a career high in pressures, but just what a workhorse, man. A flexible three technique, who when the Flores system came to an end here, where he played kind of that hybrid end role as kind of a 4-eye, 5-tech type, I had some questions on if he really had the size to hang as a full-time like 3 technique. And he hasn't quite been the like impact run defender in terms of like, you know, run stops and PFF run defense grade and all that stuff. But he has held up just fine for kind of a taller, you know, lighter pound for pound defensive tackle. He is a grinder in the trenches, not a liability in the run game. And he definitely has some quickness and a variety of different ways that he wins as a pass rusher. So like he is just a really good kind of number 3 defensive lineman. They'll move him all over the field. He's just a really good floor raiser for any defensive line, and they're happy to have him. And then they draft Kenneth Grant in the first round. Super traitsy nose tackle. They take him with the 13th pick. That's probably the peak of where I was comfortable with Kenneth Grant. He's another rookie, just like we said on Chop, where I just don't know how good he's going to be immediately for the Dolphins. And them picking him at 13th, just like I said with Chop going at 20th, it's like that's kind of like the very peak of where I would have considered this player. So hopefully for Dolphins fans, it's back-to-back years where I have to kind of say like, yeah, I should have been higher on what Kenneth Grant was going to do right away. He's an interesting prospect because he's got all the traits in the world to be a do-it-all 3-down nose tackle, which there's just not many of those guys, right? Like guys that can eat up double teams and get after the quarterback on passing downs. It's a short list. And if this guy hits, that's a game-changing type of player, especially with the construction of this group. It really would make sense with him as your nose tackle, Sealer as your 3-tech, Chop screaming off the edge, and then if either Phillips or Chubb can get and stay healthy, I mean, if they both can, that's even better. But if either of them can, like that's a awesome construction for a defensive line with Kenneth Grant, the version for his upside. The role fit makes total sense, but he is a guy at Michigan that, in my opinion, a lot of times, because of his athleticism and because he can win with a nice swim move and he is able to kind of bounce around blocks and play an athletic brand of football, especially against college competition, he is one of these guys that a lot of times didn't always do the dirty work that you're going to need him to do at the NFL level. And it led to some inconsistencies in his nose tackle tape. So I do think coming into a Dolphins organization that at times has been criticized for, Miami, South Beach, it's a speed-based team. Like they got to get the toughness side of things out of Kenneth Grant, because it's not that it's never there. When they went against Ohio State and it's the big rivalry game, Kenneth Grant put his head down. He did the tough shit that he needs to do. But there's a lot of times where he lets his pad level get up, or he doesn't rush with the bull rush that it's really only in there in flashes with Kenneth Grant. You want to see that bull rush be his go-to pass rushing ability to compress the pocket. And yeah, if you can occasionally line him up, get him a matchup, let him win with the finesse and the quickness, like as a changeup, sure. But that's really the Kenneth Grant profile for me, is getting the consistency out of his game. It's all in there. And I understand what they see in him. So that's something that absolutely, with the right coaching and the right mentality from Kenneth Grant, could click sooner rather than later. So he's an exciting draft pick. And then likewise with the interior of the defensive line, there's just not a lot of depth here, man. And that does play a factor. You want to have depth with your defensive line. You don't really have depth from a rotational standpoint. But beyond that, like if they want to run base 3-4, they don't really have another guy to trust. And then we mentioned, obviously, if Phillips or Chubb go down, you're you're leaning on some pretty crappy depth on the edge too to start for you. But this is a defensive line that is going to want the flexibility to come out in 5-1 fronts and have 3 down interior defensive linemen. And right now it's like, all right, is that guy Benito Jones? Okay, I guess. I mean, he's a big body. That's about it. It's about the nicest thing you could say about Benito Jones. He's had some interesting pass rush wins at times, but he should be your 4th or 5th piece. Jordan Phillips, a 5th round pick, right? Like, okay, he's a 5th round pick, but he did show some good stuff as a run defender. I liked his tape there. He keeps good pad level and plays physical, but he is like totally missing a first step and a killer instinct as a pass rusher. But maybe he's a guy to, have some hope for, that if you want to get into your base 3-4 or 5-1 fronts, he can get out there and play some good early down interior reps for you. Matt Dickerson, Matthew Butler, these guys haven't been much. They've played around the league. And then Zeke Bigger is a total project. I got to stand right next to him at the Shrine Bowl. This is one of those guys that, it's a reminder of what some of these NFL athletes are capable of. I mean, he's got 36-inch arms. He's 6'5", 330. He is a specimen, and he can move, and that's about it. So they got to keep teaching him how to play football. But I understand absolutely throwing a 7th round dart throw on him to get him in the building with Anthony Weaver, who is, by the way, an excellent defensive line coach. That's been his primary role throughout all of his different stops and coming from Baltimore. And probably too late in the video to give Anthony Weaver a shout out, but he deserves some credit for working with Chop Robinson last year. Getting to pair him with Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips and these guys, Zeke Biggers. That's a huge asset for this Dolphins team, for sure, from a developmental standpoint. But a polarizing defensive line, to say the least. Obviously, if you could guarantee me health on Chubb and Phillips, I mean, this is just with that guarantee alone, this is closer to a top 10 pass rush at least. But you guarantee that on top of maybe further development from Chop and Kenneth Grant, some of these young guys, there's a ton of potential for this to be a top 10 defensive line this year. Right now, as we rank teams closer to their floor with all these units, I have them 21st to 23rd for overall defensive line, which is higher than they were last year. 17th to 23rd for pass rush, so pushing top half already. And then for the run defense, a little bit lower, 17th to 22nd, pretty average. Not great, not bad. Definitely one of several very polarizing units for this Dolphins team. But finally, with the linebacker group, I think we at least know what we're getting here, and this is an easier conversation to have. In fact, the Dolphins are smack dab in the middle of the league, a B- grade for overall linebacker grade, 15th in the league. They're a C+ grade for linebacker coverage, 15th to 17th, and a B- grade for linebacker run defense, 15th to 16th. So, all right, we at least get to catch our breath with a pretty simple conversation here, frankly. They bring in Jordan Brooks, who is exactly what they paid him to be, exactly what he was in Seattle. A heat-seeking missile, really a great run defender. The only thing stopping him from being someone I would consider one of the best run-defending linebackers in the league is his missed tackle rate is still higher than you want to see for someone in that category. 11% this year. He was at 16% last year, which was really brutal, and ultimately why Seattle decided to let him walk. But that's kind of his one deficiency in run defense. But otherwise, this is something we don't see a ton of in the game today. A 6'1", 245-pound linebacker that can get off blocks, loves to hit. He's an asset for the run defense. No way around it. Just some of those missed tackles, you'd love to see him get it cleaned up. I mean, back in 2021, he was down at 7.4%. So I would take that, about a 4% improvement from where he was at last year. Maybe he can take that last step. But also, his aggressive mindset, some of the lack of change of direction skills and just lack of zone IQ. He's just not a coverage player, man. He's consistently towards the top in yards allowed for linebackers. He's a guy that consistently takes the cheese on play action. And again, he's just a little bit tight to cover dudes one-on-one, whether it's zone match or man-to-man. So he's a one-dimensional player, but he's really good at that one dimension. And then you got Tyrell Dodson, nice pickup considering he's like the opposite of Jordan Brooks. Now, Dodson's a unique evaluation because you look at him on paper, 6 foot, 237, and he's not like a crazy athlete. The 4.6 40 guy. So it's like, it's good speed. He's a good athlete, but he's not like some freaky athlete or anything like that. But he's pretty consistently been a coverage first linebacker. I would say he's pretty clearly a better coverage defender than Jordan Brooks, just in terms of turning and running, a little bit more of that fluid athletic ability, but the zone IQ, the ability to kind of take away throws, much, much better from Dodson. And then he is just not a good run defender. He's missing some instincts in that side of the game, I think. He also has had some pretty bad tackling issues throughout his career. And that's, I think, also led to him kind of bouncing around a little bit. Seattle last year, first 4 years in Buffalo. But he did settle in coming in here from Seattle last year, went from one Mike Macdonald system to another. I just had a tweet about how funny it is how all these Mike Macdonald linebackers just played a game of musical chairs until they all kind of found the right spot for the most part. And yeah, this was the right spot because he's such a complementary player to Jordan Brooks. These guys' strengths and weaknesses play off each other really well, and it's kind of logical and a little bit of like poetic beauty to the fact that this is like a perfectly average linebacker room. And they should be able to get a little bit more out of this group now that Dodson is here the whole year. And then they do have some better depth too, like Willie Gay Jr. I think that's a fun addition. Anthony Weaver, going way back to his time at North Texas, was a linebackers coach. He's been defensive line since. But I do think he works well with linebackers too. And maybe even Joe Barry get a little bit of credit. Obviously a horrible defensive coordinator, but he's their linebackers coach. I don't know how much credit I'm ready to give Joe Barry there, but Willie Gay fascinates me. Tremendous athlete, tremendous instincts, but just about no discipline at all in terms of play diagnostics and, gap discipline. So he's been all over the place. He's bounced around now. He was in New Orleans last year, but, sometimes these linebackers just take a long time for it to click, and wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if Willie Gay finally broke out in year 6. I like it as an addition, as depth. And then KJ Britt is the perfect backup to Jordan Brooks. That just makes so much sense. He played a run defense-oriented role for Tampa, and they wanted more of a three-dimensional player there. But if Brooks is going to get hurt, KJ Britt stepping in as that thumper makes total sense. Channing Tindall, again, hopefully can get some development. Super freaky player that just, honestly, I won't beat around the bush, has no idea what he's doing, and needs to figure it out, but still a lot of traits there. So there's definitely some depth there. And that rounds out a linebacker room that obviously is just very, very solid. But then we get to the secondary and another sort of what the hell is going on here conversation because of the Jalen Ramsey deal. So let's just get out of the way. Without Jalen Ramsey, this is, in my opinion, the worst secondary in the league. And even their DB run support grade comes in with a C grade, whereas with Jalen Ramsey, one of the best run defending corners in the game, that run defense grade jumps up to a B for the secondary, and then the coverage grade goes from a D to a C+, which gets them 21st to 26th. So still a lot of questions, even if Jalen Ramsey stays here, but it is much better with Jalen Ramsey. And that, being such a dramatic split is probably why it's taken the Dolphins so long to make this move. Now, if I'm the Dolphins, I would get this taken care of sooner rather than later because, like, Asante Samuel Jr. is still out there, for example, and getting him to come back to the state of Florida in an off-zone system would be a great way to kind of, split the difference here. And maybe that's my take, that they trade Ramsey, we see Asante Samuel here, and then everything we say about the with and without splits with Jalen Ramsey, I would say drop that right smack dab in the middle with an Asante Samuel Jr. Now, Jr. is more of a problem in run defense, but he would make total sense. And maybe he's holding out for that Jalen Ramsey domino to fall. But the show must go on. I am going to have this conversation without Jalen Ramsey. All right? Like, we know he's a superstar corner. He's one of the rare star corners that can actually stay healthy. Tremendous zone IQ, underrated coverage ability at this point in his career. this team is better with Jalen Ramsey, and we still have more of these conversations to have in terms of the team ranking, because they actually would not come in 24th with Jalen Ramsey. But yeah, let's have the convo without him. It's just nothing really to work with, man. They will sign someone. It would happen. But Cam Smith, year 3, goes in the second round, is someone that many had pegged as a first rounder. Slight draft win, not to dunk on Cam Smith's parade, but I had a lot more questions about him coming out, and he went much closer to where I had him going. He still ends up going pretty high. He's got a lot of traits. Like, these are the types of traits you want to bet on. He's got the length and the speed, and he's got hands when the ball is thrown his way, but that's about it. Like, he doesn't anticipate, has to clean up his man technique, has to learn how to press. Like, none of that has been proven through 2 years. And I would not bet on that to happen in year 3. He has really felt like a bust, though he did eventually get hurt last year, but that was after getting on the field finally and not playing well. So he's kind of your CB1 on the outside. Then you got Storm Duck. Him having the best name in the NFL, it can only get him so far. He ended up playing in 12 games, almost 400 snaps last year, and he played like an undrafted corner that's kind of earned some playing time, but he mostly got picked on. He is not someone you want starting. They signed Artie Burns. Okay, Artie Burns is probably the best of the group. I don't know if they would go with him over some of those younger guys. It wouldn't change the grade here. He's still a week-to-week backup that can give you some decent games, some good games even, and will give you some bad games. But yeah, him as depth makes sense, not if you have to start him. Jason Marshall was a lengthy prospect out of Florida in the 5th round. I didn't get to his tape. Maybe they found some gem there, but completely unproven. Ethan Bonner's been a special team. Kendall Sheffield's got some speed. That's, again, kind of the nicest thing you can say about him. As a once hyped up prospect that's now bounced around the league, this is not an NFL caliber cornerback room. You do have Kader Coho, who's a really nice slot corner. I like Kader Coho a lot. But he can't be the best member of your secondary. I like his coverage feel from the slot. I think he's twitchy. I have no complaints about Kader Coho, but he's also not a great run defender from the slot. He makes those splash plays. He's not afraid to hit and jump plays or anything like that, but he does miss his share of tackles. In fact, last year he missed more than his share of tackles, missed 24%, which is unacceptable. He was better in previous years. He's got to get back to at least 15% the previous 2 years. But yeah, he's going to get a nice contract somewhere as a starting slot corner. But again, he cannot be your best cover corner. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then on top of that, I mean, we just said the Jags might have the worst safety room in the league. The Dolphins are quickly reminding us that that's not so certain. Now, I do like these signings. I think these are the types of signings that maybe a team should make if they have one hole at safety and they're trying to create a competition between 2 interesting players to see who can win that battle. Maybe takes a different angle when these 2 guys are like the only safeties on your team for the most part. Ifeatu Melifonwu was a cornerback coming out that transitioned to a dime back role for the Lions, kind of that PJ Williams role in that Saints-inspired defense where they didn't really ask him to play with too much zone discipline or be too worried about blowing coverages. Just go out, read the quarterback's eyes, go make some plays. At times, like man up slot wide receivers and tight ends, because he does have that interesting cornerback background where he has some man coverage skills. But in terms of like being an actual starting safety, really up in the air, frankly. I do think he's at least interesting enough to put that fun up and down yellow arrow on him, because he is kind of one of these maybe dart throw signings where he's got playmaking instincts. There's, fun aspects to his game. He's got the athleticism. It's kind of the first time we've seen him in a real like starting safety opportunity. So we'll see. And then Ashton Davis is in a similar-ish park, again, with that yellow up and down arrow on top of a very spotty 70 overall rating. It's just been a spot starter and, backup, and he's had his moments in the last couple of years for that Jets defense where he's had some picks, he's had some moments like, all right, this is a former 3rd-round pick with good range. I loved his tape coming out, but eventually kind of got benched because the run defense side of things were just a disaster, and he wasn't making as many plays in coverage as they wanted. So he kind of has had this roller coaster of opportunities and success. Like I like the player again as a dart throw, but locking him in as a starter right now, dangerous territory. Especially considering where their cornerback room is at. And then your safety depth does not get me excited. Elijah Campbell's been around, is kind of a backup. The Dante Trader pick was early to me. I saw a good special teamer, someone that loves to hit. Some shades maybe of what like Brandon Jones was coming out of Texas. Jones is obviously developed, but like not an athlete, but loves to tackle. Jones struggled for this Dolphins team. Dolphins fans would tell you that. So wasn't a huge fan of that pick. Wouldn't expect much, certainly this year. And that's really it, man. So yeah, this secondary is a big part of this team coming in 25th. Frankly, it's a group that could really get picked on, and I would fully expect, even if Jalen Ramsey is here, which things would be better with him, obviously, as we said, but even with him here, I wouldn't really expect him to be here again the next year. So this is a unit that is going to have to invest in some pieces here in the future, I believe. But that rounds out our defense here. So like I said, the splits are different with and without Ramsey. Without Jalen Ramsey and having the worst secondary in the league, the Dolphins come in 30th for overall defense. Very poor, very concerning. With Jalen Ramsey, that climbs up to 27th. But the pass defense is 29th without him and 25th with him. And then just to jump ahead a little bit to get this out of the way, they obviously come in 24th overall for the team power rankings. Without Jalen Ramsey is how we're going about this. I'm expecting a trade. 21st with Jalen Ramsey. These ratings are all tight, and a player like Jalen Ramsey being on your team or not, it can make that difference, and that's what we're seeing here. So if they don't trade Jalen Ramsey, at least Dolphins fans, you can do some mental gymnastics and know that they will be 21st in these rankings. And then if they sign Asante Samuel, maybe 22nd or 23rd. But anyway, we gotta have those conversations. I get those out of the way, but either way, this defense has a lot of work to do. The D-line has a lot of potential. I think the linebacking group kind of is what it is. I don't think this defense has exceptional potential. But could they be good enough that they don't get in the way of this team being a sneaky playoff team if everything kind of goes right with the offense? I think that is at least in the realm of possibilities. And I do hope that the edge guys are healthy, that the secondary can at least round into form a little bit. Because I think Anthony Weaver has a chance to really prove us something special here. But I do question if he's going to have the pieces this year to take that step. But I don't think he's going to be bad enough that he loses his job either, most likely. But let's talk a little special teams as we start to round things out here. So the Dolphins come in 22nd for special teams overall. They were very split between the PFF grades for special teams and the DVOA team grades for special teams. PFF had them 31st and DVOA had them 11th to 12th, tied with one other team. So that was fascinating. That obviously averages out a little bit below average. Their kicker grade, very good. Jason Sanders is awesome, 6th in the NFL. The punter grade is interesting. Jake Bailey, I think, was 9th or so over the last 2 years, but they did sign Ryan Stonehouse, and Stonehouse is being listed as their starter right now. I know they can save a little bit of money by going to Stonehouse over Jake Bailey. Maybe they are that tight for money. But that would be, at least based on the grades of the last 2 years, a downgrade if they went with Stonehouse. So that whole situation is going to be interesting. When it was just Jake Bailey, I think they were 17th in special teams. Whereas they're obviously 22nd with this kind of debacle here. And then for the returners, they are average, 14th to 22nd. Malik Washington showed some good stuff returning kicks last year. And then they do get Tosh Washington back, who wasn't able to play for them last year. They drafted him, I think, primarily to return punts, and he's got a lot of potential there for sure. He's exciting. So those two guys are unproven, but that could be one of the more fun return duos, frankly, the Washington duo. Ironically, 2 straight deep dives. We've now had 3 Washingtons, all in the state of Florida, returning kicks in the NFL this year. But certainly with the change in special teams coordinator, which is not listed there as well, this has a lot of potential with the special teams to actually be a strength of this team. if everything can come together. But yeah, let's really tie this all together before we look at the schedule and my win total expectations for this team. Obviously, we already kind of did the team splits with and without Jalen Ramsey. But just to recap this team's strengths, weaknesses, and those big pivotal factors that are ultimately going to decide if this team shatters this 25th ranking or maybe even finishes lower. I do think this team has even a bit of a floor to go below this if everything goes wrong. But the strengths, offensive coaching and play calling, I am still confident enough to call that a strength. If things go like they did last year, maybe we'll rethink that. But the weapons, again, I do still think is a general strength. It's between being a strength and an elite strength, depending on what Tyreek Hill gives them, of course. And then just overall team speed is still a strength. Tyreek Hill is still pretty juiced up, but you do still have Waddle and Devon Achane. Like, even if it's week to week, matchup dependent type of stuff, there are weeks where it's just tough to keep pace with this team. It really is. Weaknesses, as we broke down, offensive line and secondary, and then January, which has plagued this team since the 20th century. Wild cards, Tyreek Hill, so important what version of him they get this year. The defensive line, between the health questions and the youth. Can Chop Robinson take a step? What do they get, of course, from Kenneth Grant? The spectrum on that defensive line is very, very wide, from like top 6 to like bottom 5, frankly. That's dramatic. It's really dramatic. Tough group to rank. Jalen Ramsey and that trade, and a potential ensuing maybe Asante Samuel signing, kind of the one hanging free agent that would make a ton of sense as an addition there. Just to get ahead of that potentially. And then you do have to throw Tua's health in there. Is Tua healthy at the end of the year? Does he suffer a concussion and things get derailed early? Like, that's all a real conversation that needs to be mentioned here. Some very, very serious wild cards for this Dolphins team, whose range of possibilities is just all over the map, man. So let's take a look at this team's schedule. And I think, considering like the Patriots in this division, who we had a couple episodes ago, like their schedule was such a cakewalk. I kind of expected that for the Dolphins to be pretty easy, and it's really not. Like, it's not a brutal schedule. It's a lot of those same opponents, but like the difficult opponents that they drew, for the most part, they have to play at home. And then the easier opponents, they have to go on the road. And I think, mathematically speaking, you would prefer to get those games that you have a better chance of winning, get those at home and lock those up, and just kind of accept, like, yeah, all right, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Tampa, Washington, the Chargers, we're probably not going to beat those guys anyway, so we'd rather just go on the road and accept that and have that underdog mentality. And it really doesn't line up for them well in that sense. Like, they have to go to Indianapolis week 1. That's not going to be easy. They got to go to Carolina. They got to go to Cleveland, go to Atlanta, go to Pittsburgh week 15. All these non-division games, for the most part, they're tough ones, are on the road. They do get New Orleans at home, but things didn't line up great for them in that sense. So for a team who Vegas didn't really know what to do with their over-under, I kind of played it in the middle. If you look at FanDuel, you can only get them at 8.5 and 6.5. The 7.5 wasn't actually available there. But if you took the over on the 8.5, it was huge money. And if you took the over of 6.5, you got like no money. So the math would tell you that even odds will be at about 7.5. And I think most books are going to have them around that point. But I do think Vegas is a little bit, they don't really know how to play this team, just as I've kind of described in this episode. I do lean the under of 7.5 because I just don't have confidence that Tua is going to stay healthy, man. I just don't. I don't know how you can. And as much as I love my Zach Wilson take, that's still a long shot. Maybe he comes in and plays well and he gets them to 9 or 10 wins. But it's not just the quarterback. Like, there's so many different wild card factors for this team. I think the odds would tell you some of that stuff's going to go wrong. I think this is a transition season for Miami. And I think 6 or 7 wins is the most likely outcome for this team. Certainly some upside to go above that, as we've said. And maybe that's where you try to find value with like the division odds. I don't know, like, You'd have to really be against Buffalo to do that. I just don't know that there's too much value to be had betting on the Dolphins this year unless you're going under. Or I guess maybe you do take that 8.5 line and just swing for the upside of this team. But anyway, obviously not a team coming in with my 25th power ranking with a ton of questions that I have a lot of faith in. I do have to hear from you guys, though. What do you guys think about all these interesting conversations? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? How many wins do you think the Dolphins get this year with this schedule? Let me know all of it in the comments down below. And of course, let me know who do you think comes in now with the 23rd ranking in these power rankings. Things are getting interesting. We're getting into teams that have playoff hopes, certainly. So let me know all of it down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. I really appreciate it. And until the next deep dive, thank you. We'll see you later.